All right, why don't we get things started? Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Mona Cattell, and I am the founder of Craft, Digital Media and Innovation Advisory Forum, and I'm so excited to be here today on behalf of RAVE Computer and the entire panel to talk to you all around how to navigate the F word. So it's pretty exciting to bring you all of the panelists in the collaboration today. And so in the spirit of community and collaboration, we really wanted to create an open forum to discuss with anyone that's really either just getting started down the path of immersive technology within their own organizations, or have started to deploy the technology but are really running into some challenges. So again, the whole goal today is to bring the unique points of views of every panelist here. We've got leaders from the HMD side. We've got our clients here today. We've got people who can bring together their experience from the compute perspective and really the power that you need to make your immersive campaigns come to life and how you can really be successful. So here we are really just being collective today in the spirit of community to bring you this valuable insight and just really have an open discussion. So we're here during SIGGRAPH 2020, and we hope that you're taking advantage of everything that the event offers. And we're really kicking off our participation in SIGGRAPH with this exciting panel. So we'll talk about how to navigate the most common pitfalls, because really at the end of the day, I think what we'll find out of all of the participants today is we each represent such an array of different industries, from the government and defense side to automotive and manufacturing, the media and entertainment, and so much more. And so I think in 1 hour, we're only going to really be scratching the surface here. And so we encourage you to really ask your questions. I'll be taking questions throughout. When everyone registered, I was blown away by just how many questions we've already received. And so I think it'll be dynamic and it'll be exciting. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. And in fact, I'll let them each introduce themselves. So why don't we go around, starting with Ryan, if you don't mind giving an introduction and then answering for me, what do you really hope to share with the audience today? And what do you hope that people will learn coming out of it today?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Ryan Oberholzer. I am a mixed reality developer and component prototyping engineer at Ford Motor Company. And today I really hope to give some insight into how VR and MR and everything else can be used from on the industry side, on the manufacturing and consumer side, really.
Thanks, Ryan. John, do you want to jump in?
Yes, John O'Neill. I'm a solutions engineer from Vario, and I'm really hoping to just build some more education around the adoption of VR for training and immersion, and kind of the best practices approach to rolling it out and implementing it in all verticals.
Thanks, John. Rick?
Hi, everyone. I am Rick Champagne, and I am Global Industry Strategy and Marketing for Media and Entertainment at NVIDIA. Come by way of HP, where I helped launch the predecessor to the ZVR backpack, and before that, Autodesk, where I ran product management for the entertainment creation suites. For me, it's really about simulating reality and taking VR to the next level. And so, I hope folks learn a little bit more about what NVIDIA is doing around that. But of course, some of the other panelists are also very interested in this, as you just heard. So yeah, simulating reality from visuals all the way through to audio and physics.
Thanks, Rick. Tom?
Hi, I'm Tom Armbruster. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at 209 Group. We're a virtual production integration company, and I hope to kind of share where we see immersive technology today in the industries that we service, as well as talk about where we see it heading in the future, both near and far.
Awesome, Tom. Thank you. Carl? Oh, let's unmute you.
How's this? I'm Carl Rosenberger, Director of Product Development for RAVE Computer. I lead the team that designs hardware for the enablement of many of these immersive solutions. Today, I hope to share my perspective on how to avoid some of the pitfalls in making projects successful, how to get buy-in and have an experience that makes the platform effective.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for, giving your time to be here today. I mean, I don't know, I'm just so excited to really just get things going and, just really talk as one community and collaborate on how we can really start to innovate for the future. So with that, I'd like to ask my very first question that may be fundamental for some others, but I think, as we've discussed preparing for the panel, there may be some important definitions that might help frame our thinking around what is immersive technology and what are the different types. And so my first question to the panelists is XR, VR, AR, and MR. There are differences that are some obvious, some not so obvious. So I don't know, John, Carl, do you guys want to jump in and maybe give us a little rundown on that?
So XR would be the X standing for any other letter. And VR, of course, is virtual reality. AR is reality with an augmented, think of labels putting over points of interest in a camera view. And MR is a little bit different from AR in that it's interactive. So in MR, you might have the ability to not see something in reality because of the virtual image in front of it, but you can move around and interact with those virtual elements, unlike in AR.
Yeah, and I would add, one of the wonderful things that we're doing right now, having so many types of interactive experiences, going from VR, AR, MR, XR, it kind of comes back to something we really want to talk about is selecting the right tool for the job. So there's times when you want a fully immersive, completely contained virtual environment where the outside world doesn't matter. And so completely all encompassed in VR will solve that problem. There's other times when you're doing a multi-user engagement or the persistence of the room or the environment around you is important. And that's where you need to think about an AR experience. Or if you need things that are fully opaque and you're not looking through a virtual 3D object in an AR environment, that's where a mixed reality, an XR, a video pass-through, something that we do quite a bit of, really would make the most sense so that you can mix the best of both worlds, the virtual and the real.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So with that, why we're all here today, what makes programs fail? So I think for this one, everybody's got a pretty different point of view here. So I'm going to go around and just ask everybody for, their 30-second, 1-minute summary of really why are programs failing today. Why don't we start, John, since you're on the roll? Why don't we start with you?
Sure. I think the biggest reason a program fails is you lose power. But then more seriously, I think selecting the wrong hardware for the job, kind of a little bit what I started with, selecting a solution that is not embracing the immersion and absolutely not testing with your target audience. Oftentimes as a content creator, as a developer, we're too close to the problem and we don't test with our target users often enough to ensure it's comfortable, it's logical, and it's usable. And if you're not able to measure results, you're potentially wasting a lot of money.
Yeah. Who's next? Rick?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are a lot of reasons. Investment is one of them, level of investment. A lot of people have big ambitions and don't get it funded to the extent that they would love to. So they release anyway, and it's premature. There's user experience issues. Virtual reality has to virtually be real. And if you're introducing a barrier to that immersion through just simple things like UI, it causes problems and makes it harder for people to get deeply immersed into that experience. There's also a visual quality. There are things like just not making people feel good, obviously. And, I think there's also a real gap right now in sales. So we're not selling it well enough. A lot of people are hiring teams that have content creators, and we obviously need all of that. And they're hiring people who will do the marketing, but there are very few feet on the street that are out there selling VR to big corporations. And so I think that if companies start to invest more in that side of things, you really need those folks out there trying to get the big budgets in to create projects that are meaningful for people.
Absolutely. Tom, what do you think from like the content side?
Yeah, certainly from our perspective, I think the content has been the biggest factor in both the failure and the success, right? So we've seen both ends of the spectrum. So we've seen horrible, terribly poorly thought out content ruin a project. And we've seen the flip side where we've seen piles of money thrown at content where it was so beautiful and so compelling. The only problem was it just wouldn't run in a headset because it was too heavy. And, then that vision ended up getting scaled back in order just to make it viewable by the user. So, we keep thinking content, right? I mean, that's the key. And I think I've said before too, that I think we're in a good place now because a lot of what I call the silly money is kind of out of the game, right? So there was a huge rush to VR and AR maybe a year or two ago, and everybody and their brother were trying to get in the game. And that I think that gave it a bad name. And now that some of that silly money is gone and the serious players are left, we're seeing more and more great stuff come along for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, Ryan, what do you think from Ford's side? What do you think?
For me, I think a lot of it is integration into the process. So if you're creating these one-offs, that might be good. It might be able to help sell the idea. But if you're not able to actually get it integrated into the product development process, it makes it hard to keep it going and improve upon it and keep the money going and making sure that the data is where it needs to be and making sure customers can access that VR and access that data on their end and actually use it for things that are important to them.
Absolutely. What do you think, Carl? Why are companies failing?
Well, at RAVE, we're systems people, right? We put together solutions and we see a lot of failures that are based on hardware. As Tom was saying, if you don't have the performance to have the experience feed your brain with realistic real-time input, you're not going to have an experience that works. It's going to be unproductive. It could be even negative experience. If you're in a training environment, you could have negative training. Basically, our focus is to set people up with the proper or a sufficient platform to run the content. So yeah, we get involved in resurrecting projects by delivering new hardware that actually has the performance grade that these kinds of projects need.
For sure. So it's really interesting. I think Rick, you were the one that mentioned it, but there's the whole technology side, but then there's the organizational side, right? There's the soft stuff that really you need to make any immersive program or really any change management stick within an organization. And so my next question is actually a question that we got from our attendees when they were registering for the panel today. And I think it's a really important one that we hit on early on before we get into a lot of the technical, vertical specific stuff. So how do I get started? So what is required from my organization to support me in succeeding? So the idea is really like, how do you get around the naysayers? How do you create advocacy? How do you build a vision, for the future of AR and VR, et cetera? So, and then the caveat to that is, a lot of these people, they don't have labs. A lot of organizations, like Ford has a lab. A lot of organizations don't really have that yet. And so what do I do to get started? So I think that's a really important one. I've got my thoughts, but I want to hear your thoughts as well. So who wants to take that one?
Well, I'm
Rick?
not on mute and everybody else is, so I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I think it's like any other program. There has to be, why are you doing it in the first place? Is this something that's going to add value to the business? And this is, thinking about it in terms of, if you're a corporation and you want to have a lab, but what are you trying to accomplish with it? What's the ROI? What are the, I think it's like any standard business case. What are the measurements that you're going to have? How are you going to prove success? And just thinking about it in terms of any other program that you would bring into your company. A lot of companies I see are doing research, and that's great. We need that. We need all of these folks out there who are bringing new value and new ideas to VR. And I think there are a lot of really great examples, and I can share some of them. But, ultimately, at the end of the day, it either has to generate revenue for a company, or it has to generate new IP, or it has to generate, some kind of value. And I think I haven't seen a lot of really great business cases outside of, the more mature areas of VR right now. So obviously training and simulation, and there are some experiences that are very profitable now, and there are games that are very profitable. We're seeing a lot. You know, I think it was Tom talking about the maturity of the market. We're seeing more and more now, and I guess it was called the silly money or something out of the mix. I think that's helpful, but you know, we still need those projects that help rise all tides, but they just need a better business case, I think.
Yeah, I really like both what Tom and Rick said. We're kind of past that point of, is it feasible? You know, there are cases that show VR works, and it works in this situation, and kind of going away from an organization's thoughts on what they want to achieve. I think one of the things that absolutely helps success is selecting partners in the hardware space that are going to support that success. You know, I've seen countless times development teams trying to work with new technology where either they've never used it or they've experimented and they've done it wrong. And it's one thing to enable them with documentation and, you know, some information that's available on the web, go forth and build. But it's another actually when you have partnership programs that ensure the success of a company and their justification to their management is going to be bought in because they selected a partner in hardware that is going to assist them and not just say, well, you bought it, go forth and build. So it's kind of the same thing we've seen a shift in development where it used to be a waterfall, you know, design, build, deploy, and hey, hopefully it works. And now it's a lot more involvement throughout the process where I have an idea, I want to design a VR solution. What's capable of working in my constraints, and how do I find those answers? How do I find a partner who can tell me that? What's the best hardware to drive the solution? What's the best HMD to realize the visuals? How do I deploy this in a world of COVID where I can't go out and set it up? So there's the infrastructure question outside of the content as well. That's something that I think is often an oversight.
You know, to John's point, we at RAVE do a lot of testing hand in hand with our customers. Selling a system and being done with it is the farthest thing from our mentality. We do a lot of testing both with off-the-shelf software, benchmarking software, and customer applications. And just like Vario, we want to make sure that our customers are successful because we're really interested in a long-term relationship, and we're only successful if the customer is successful. Enabling them to have successful projects brings them back to us. It brings us other interested parties that are serious about what they're doing. And working very, very closely with our partners as a team gives the customer the best chance of success.
Absolutely. You know, what's really interesting is this idea of change management. So if you're trying to get really a lot of buy-in from the leadership and to really make, you know, digital innovation, in particular immersive technology, sticky and valuable for your company, I think of a George Bernard Shaw quote where, I don't know if you've heard of it, those who cannot change their mind cannot change anything. And so if we continue to push change away, if we opt to stay in our comfort zones, not a lot changes. And so, but we all have this desire to do something meaningful in our companies and to do something meaningful in the world to make an impact, whether it's big or small. And so ultimately, new technology means change in how people work, how they interact, how they learn, how they collaborate. You know, you're asking people to do things that maybe they've never done before. I mean, this is going to completely change the way they work every single day. So I think to get it right, you've got to start with people. And I don't think we talk about that enough. I think people want to understand how their work is changing. But without the right information from the start, I think we can create our own conclusions. And so for people who are asking, how do we get past the naysayers? I think clearly communicating with the people who are impacted, whether that means, you know, bringing them onto the process of identifying the right technology, right? Making them part of the success story, if you will, I think is really, really important. And then I think the other thing that is interesting, and I don't know if you guys would agree, but having executive sponsors. So you've got to get your people who are actually going to be using the technology on board, but you have to have an executive sponsor, some champion of the program from the top that will create so much opportunity from a funding side, from just creating the team that you need to really succeed, to, you know, giving you the room to purchase the right hardware, to purchase the right headsets, to create the right content. So I don't know what you guys think about all of that, but from my side, you know, I don't think there can be a one-size-fits-all approach, but if you get your people in line and you have the executive sponsorship, you can make the right decisions you need to really create success with your immersive program.
I think that's kind of a best case scenario if you have an executive who's behind it. And I love it when that works. I wish it were the case all the time, but you know, in those situations where, you know, executives are going to ask the questions of why would I invest that much money? You know, why would I do this? And sometimes a content development team, they don't think about that. They're more on the content creation. They're the, how do I make the most interactive and the most rich visual experience? But at what cost in people, in time, in money? And so if you absolutely can get that executive, wonderful. If not, you know, finding any advocate, finding a partner inside of the company who is the advocate, who can push it up the chain, hopefully is the next best thing. But again, it goes back to support that. And I love, Carl, the fact that, you know, RAVE is very involved with customer success. It's not just one customer success. It's showing a trend of other clients have had similar needs, and the ones we can publicly talk about, this is a similar solution to what you're asking for. So if you need justification to your management, here's a whole slew of examples of solutions that have been created that are slightly different, but they show real results. And so it's the ROI. It truly is here's a customer that took the chance, they invested, they built, they succeeded, or they failed and they learned from it, and being honest about that failure. Because we always have a long way to go. Technology is always driving forward, and we're always looking for ways to improve, but we're never at that, we're done. There's always something else coming out. There's always a new piece of technology, a new standard to evolve. And so it's finding ways to help guide and recommend and learn through failure. You know, not everything is going to be a success.
And to add to that, a lot of people, especially, you know, we were talking earlier about VR being a buzzword in the last couple of years. People try to, you know, come up with a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. They say, you know, we need VR to solve this. Well, what is this? So, you know, making sure that there is actually a problem to solve, and then showing how VR can solve that problem, you know, is a big thing that you need to focus on.
A lot of people come to talk to us, and you know, we find ourselves in a trusted advisor position for hardware constantly. But a lot of the times when we're working in immersion, like John said, we'll share our own experiences where it's legitimate to do so. I mean, we have plenty of NDAs in place where we don't talk about anything these people are doing. But in many cases, people that are getting started can use a little bit of guidance. You know, what's going to work for me? Here's what I want to accomplish. But does my plan even make sense? Is it like other people's plans? We can actually help a great deal with that, not just hardware performance, but how the project will be successful, because we've seen other people make mistakes, and we've seen a lot of people be successful, and we can share both.
For sure. So in the context of COVID-19, because everybody's really, you know, it's unbelievable the impact that it's had obviously on everybody's lives, and it's amazing the opportunities that technology has presented to keep us all connected. But I think there's a play here for immersive tech. And so, you know, what do we think the value of immersive tech is, maybe in the context of COVID-19, maybe even broader? So one idea that comes to mind is global collaboration. And I think, Ryan, you might be able to speak to that a little bit more, but I'd be curious, Tom, to hear your thoughts, Ryan, to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, from the media and entertainment space, it's widely viewed as the solution moving forward, and that is, you know, the shooting up against LED walls, like we keep seeing and reading about, remote users. You know, there's been a huge push to move artists, you know, content to artists at home. They've even kind of lifted some of the the security issues that used to be in place around assets being moved around to people's homes. So the idea of these virtual production stages now, where a significantly lower number of people need to be present and face-to-face, for lack of a better term, and more distributed work with people all over the world pushing content to that stage remotely it's certainly the way that Hollywood's moving forward right now. And I think that that's going to be in place for some time. You know, I think hopefully everyone will realize that there's a big chunk of that probably can just stay in place post-COVID. Hopefully there is a post-COVID, you know?
Yeah. Ryan, what do you think from like the automotive and manufacturing side?
Yeah, I mean, even before COVID, I mean, Ford is a global company. We have offices, everywhere around the world. So being able to immersively collaborate on a project, is a huge help. You don't have engineers and designers flying halfway, flying to Australia to look at a model, or, you can be in the same room looking at the same data halfway around the world, whenever it's convenient for you. You can even be doing, an immersive review where you have Australia looking at a model when it's midnight in Dearborn. And then the next morning, designers come in, take a look at that recorded session, and then can make updates and be working on that model 24/7 and, get products out faster and in better, ways than ever before.
Absolutely. Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, we've developed some VR for ourselves, and we do that because sometimes, there are content creators out there, and they're developing for what's available today, and we need to scout ahead. And so, we don't want to be bound maybe by software that only takes advantage of one GPU or, different things like that. So we've done things like Project Holodeck, which was a collaborative environment. And the idea really was to get to a level of photorealism that hadn't been achieved before. So, taking our best GPUs and our best technology, and then developing software development toolkits that would help, develop other developers in the future. But so Project Holodeck, really, the idea was to allow that kind of collaboration where you can have people coming in from different parts of the world, and they can be collaborating on a photorealistic, and we use the example of a car. And so you could be going in, we had cars with millions of polygons and parts, down to nuts and bolts, and you can do exploded views, you can comment and annotate. And then, and then now, if we fast forward, that same sort of methodology went behind what we call Omniverse, which is a new collaborative environment, and we have a limited beta right now. It's an early access thing, but we also have an AEC experience that's part of that, and people who are working on architecture, engineering, construction can go in, and there's a whole user interface for that market. And they can collaborate together. You can enter in VR, and you can work with some of your favorite applications if you're using Unreal or Revit or whatever else. And likewise, there's Maya support and other applications, Houdini and so on. But the idea, again, is remote teams collaborating together. And with Omniverse, what we've done differently there too is we've enabled real-time ray tracing to be able to take advantage of as many GPUs as you throw at it. So the level of realism and physics and materials and everything that's a part of the world that you're building is at a level that hasn't been seen before. And so we have Jeff Kember, who will be doing a talk here at SIGGRAPH this week on Omniverse, if you want to check that out. But yeah, so, and then you have Unreal with VR scouting, and there's lots of really cool things out there where you can come together as a group and collaborate.
Actually, to key on to one of the things Rick was talking about, photorealism is actually, something that's really important for remote teams, for us as well. Being able to see realistic shadows and realistic lighting, really adds to the truth of the data, so you don't necessarily have to be sitting in a studio looking at a clay under real lights. You could be doing that virtually, and, in this, and like you were talking about during COVID times, that's super important to be able to say that, what you're looking at is realistic lighting and realistic conditions.
Yeah. So realism is really important, obviously, for VR and making these technologies successful. So I'm curious, what other specific features in VR really have the most opportunity to move the needle forward in terms of general acceptance? So John, do you want to jump in? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, just as, coming from Vario here.
Absolutely. Yeah, general acceptance, I think, if you think about the way we interact with the world, and particularly you shift to VR, we're still using our eyes. And so one of the exciting technologies that's been around prior to VR, but is now being integrated with VR and helping us solve problems and expose others, is eye tracking. And, extremely accurate eye tracking, allowing for not only the utilization of analytics, responsive behavior, or interaction using your eyes in a natural way, but from a technological standpoint, taking advantage of foveated rendering, which is basically saying focus all the detail where the fovea, the detail point that your eyes are looking at any one time, is going to take place. So as we're pushing the bounds for building richer, more detailed, more realistic environments, and I love the term virtually real that Rick said. I absolutely agree with that. But to do that, you're taxing your hardware, and we're packing more and more pixels in these displays. So we need to be able to maximize the detail that's occurring in those displays. We do a tremendous amount of work at Vario, focusing on very rich, very detailed, real eye resolution, not only with the virtual environment, but also through the pass-through. But with that, saying we identify problems, one of the things that has plagued virtual reality is what we call the divergence accommodation conflict. And just briefly, the simple way to describe that is basically, our eyes and our brains are extremely well-designed tools. And it's always worked where focus and vergence, the point at which you're looking at something and where your eyes are focusing, meet. But in virtual reality, when we're putting a lens and a display very close, the focal distance and the vergence no longer match. And the problem is you essentially can create headaches, fatigue, and possibly even nausea. Basically, it's bad. So that's one of the reasons why eye tracking is extremely exciting, because we can start doing things with simulated retinal blur, foveated rendering, and as we get more and more advanced with lens technology, varifocal lenses, basically making it more like the real world, the reality coming into a virtual environment. So it is comfortable and it is acceptable and it's usable by more and more people. Probably one of the last things I'll say is really exciting is because there are so many companies in multiple industries working together, there is an open standard. We are working on saying there's a standard, a platform that everyone's welcome to, and it's not just one company building VR, because this is actually something an eye tracking company, Tobii, really taught me, that the acceptance of technology and the use, the proper design and adoption of virtual reality and eye tracking in particular is not one company's responsibility, but it's all companies' responsibilities. Because if you're making an experience that the users have where they see a rich, realistic virtual environment and it's accepted as a replacement or an augmentation for some training and immersion and communications, then that's a benefit for everyone, not just one. So those absolutely are kind of the big things that really excite me, obviously.
One of the big things that we've found as well is hand tracking is a huge player in this, especially when you're talking about virtual reality, when you're not seeing any of the outside world, being able to see your hands is a huge, it really adds to, grounding yourself in that virtual environment, especially when you align something to something else. So if you're saying you're sitting in a car, being able to see your hands reach out and actually touch a virtual steering wheel really adds to that realism. That's a huge part of it.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that, Ryan. So my next question for you is, how can immersion then be used to assist in the product development process then? Like, tell us a little bit about your story here. Ryan.
Yes, yeah, sorry. It can really help in all facets of the product development process. We've done VR really, really early in the process. It helps you see parts in a one-to-one scale in their environment before there's ever an actual physical prototype, and that's really big. You can make decisions based on if a part will fit in a space really easily. Using new headsets where like John was talking about with real eye resolution, you can look down at the details of where panels come together on a vehicle, and you can actually make decisions. Ford makes decisions on tooling in virtual reality before we ever actually send those tools off to be made. So I mean, it can be, and then even after a part gets made, you can come back to validation on, can someone on the assembly line actually put that part on a vehicle? Can it be assembled? So we can do everything from early prototyping to pre-tooling to actually manufacturing the vehicle using virtual reality, and can make educated decisions that way.
I think that kind of brings up a fantastic design tenet, is keeping things realistic sized. Sometimes it's obvious, and other times when you're in development, you're like, hey, it'd be really cool if you made something super tiny, and then you could feel like a god modifying things. But, to Ryan's point, I think the usefulness and the believability, a user accepting the virtual environment, if it's as close to real world scale and as visually rich as possible, that's what's going to lead to success in a training and an immersive environment. And when you can combine that, if you can do the camera pass through and you have that tether, that anchor to the real world, where your actual hands are interacting with the steering wheel and part of the situation is virtual, I think that's where you really see the opportunities for that immersive believability that comes from, the mixed reality experience.
You could also use it to cut down on, prototyping costs. You could produce 10 virtual prototypes for almost nothing. With 3D printing, you can, make them feel like they're supposed to feel, and then you can overlay really nice materials onto them visually, and then, figure out which of those 10 you actually want to prototype and, go down that path.
It was so much more fun though when you didn't realize that a car was impossible to build until it was actually rolling down the assembly line. That's when we really used to have a good time. This is all so easy now.
So
Giant clay models.
Tom, okay, tell me about content, because content is king, right? So it's really important to get the content right. So tell us a little bit more about how content has developed from a technology and capability standpoint. I mean, I know we've talked about in the last 2 years alone, there's been a lot of advancement. So can you give us a little bit of insight in content, where we are today, how it's accelerated, and where you see content really going in the near future?
Yeah, like I said, I've seen people overshoot, and I've seen people really, really, really miss it in the other direction as well. I think the craziest part for us has really, truly been just the significant advancements in game engine technologies. I mean, that really has been a game changer for all immersive visualization. I've been around long enough that these things weren't even spoken of, not that long ago. And to see the advancements that these engines are making, and, they're being used by Ford and also to make feature films. And so the breadth of use for what's, I mean, it's truly a video game engine is what we call it, but it's getting to be so much bigger than that. And, they all have huge visions for these engines being widely adopted by everybody for doing all sorts of immersive things well beyond what we're talking about here today. And so I think that's insanely important. The development of the engines has advanced this so much faster than I think we ever imagined 5 or 6 years ago. We also see hardware is a big piece too. It really is. And, I can certainly remember the days when, a headset was $40,000 and weighed 15 pounds or something, truly unwieldy, and looked like crap at the same time. So these amazing headsets like the Vario, I mean, that are super lightweight, super high resolution, really, really, really beautiful to wear and look through, is another huge advancement. And I think we still have people today who maybe only have 1 or 2 kind of VR, AR experiences, and they were bad, and they were 5 years ago, and they need to look at it again. Like, even if you thought it was a terrible idea as little as 2 years ago, you need to look again today, because it's truly almost all completely different.
Yeah, that's really, really a big deal. The hardware needs to work together and support the level of performance the content requires. We run into that all the time. One of the things I mentioned earlier about doing lab testing with the customer's application, what that looks like is we run the customer's platform, but also import the customer data and do performance measurements, many, many, many times per second. Yeah, you mentioned something, Tom, that just kind of made me smile. One of my early VR experiences was with a really crude 240 by 480 set of LCDs. And I decided to load up, I don't know, it was Castle Wolfenstein or Duke Nukem or something along those lines. One of the games that maybe came out when EVGA was the standard, just to keep performance, manageable. And after about 20 minutes, I came out feeling like a crazy person. And after about 10 more minutes, I was barely holding it together. My eyes were running down my face, and it was just a really disconnected experience. And the problem was there wasn't a believable suspension of disbelief. It really wasn't a high fidelity environment at all. And so way back, I mean, this is 15 years or so ago or something, but that really taught me to be devoted towards making sure that you have the hardware to support the performance that you need, because I never ever wanted to have that experience again.
Yeah, and
It does.
at NVIDIA, we do both the hardware and the software. And so for us, obviously trying to get that level of realism with physics and audio and video, but we have a whole suite of software development toolkits that help people with some of the things that John and others were talking about with variable rate shading, foveated rendering, single pass stereo to make it easier or a lighter load on the compute side. Doing other things like making it easier to ray trace, and lighter that way. So we have a lot of tools in there. People can just get all of this stuff for free, basically, just by adopting these software development toolkits. And then, beyond that, we also have natural language processing. We have something called Jarvis, and I think that's another next wave is being able to use your voice as the input to increase that level of realism. So with that, you might have a digital assistant inside of VR that you can talk to who will help you. If you're doing virtual production, you can ask for that 50mm lens, and instead of going through 10 different menus, you want a different light, you just ask it to change the light, various things like that, but all the way through to maybe even, and we're doing something called Cloud XR, which is to get that super high performance at the edge. So you can be walking through a museum with a pair of glasses, and you can have a docent walking you around, and you can ask it questions like, can you take me to the Renaissance part of the gallery? They'll walk you there and you'll follow them. They'll give you a description of the painting. Maybe you can talk to the painting, and the painting will tell you, what was going on the day that their portrait was being done. And so and all of this would be, computed in the museum's RAVE computer, but it's happening over 5G or over wireless. So we're looking at it from a bunch of different ways and just trying to make it a lot more natural, realistic, obviously, but more natural. And then audio is the last one I want to mention, because I think, there's an opportunity there too to immerse people further, is to actually have audio. The way we're looking at it is ray traced, so that when audio is bouncing off of a material, the properties of that material are being taken into account. So audio inside of a glass room would sound different than inside of a padded cell, which is what COVID-19 is starting to feel like. But yeah.
So you're saying I can go talk to the Mona Lisa and ask her what she was thinking,
Right?
exactly
Yeah.
when it happened.
She could freak you out and say, "Don't look behind you." That's more Hollywood, though, right?
Yeah, right. All right. So we've got a lot of our customers come from the training and simulation side. So you've got the government, obviously, of course, media and entertainment. And Tom, I want to ask you a question in a minute, but I want to focus on training and simulation for like DoD, government, and I guess even broader training applications. So John, let me ask you a question. What do you think are some important design considerations as more companies are starting to look at moving towards immersive? So whether it's VR, AR, MR, for replacing or augmenting some of their training. I'd even caveat that to say, like, can we start looking at maintenance as an example?
Absolutely. I think we've kind of touched on a few of these already, looking at, there's always an aversion to having an instructor-driven training situation be replaced by technology. But absolutely, VR does not need to be a replacement for training on instructors. It really is an augmentation of the experience. And what we've seen many times across any industry is a well-designed virtual reality training experience gives the opportunity to decrease cost and maximize actual time with an expert. So one of the considerations is it's not a 180-degree shift going from pure trainer-led training to completely technology training led. It's where does it make the most sense and how do you augment an experience so that you're maximizing cost, time, and the efficiency of learning. And when you talk about learning, immersion we've been hitting over and over, but it is so critical. It's absolutely a factor of design. And with that, the attention value. So when you're thinking about training, if I'm speaking to an audience or you're throwing up PowerPoint slides or you're handing out PDFs, there's always distractions. You can look away at the phones, you can task switch around, look at other windows. But when you're in virtual reality, your attention is 100%. The training is all that you can do. And so it's in many ways, a disconnect and an immersion. But another consideration, that word disconnect, there's the consideration of, do you want to be completely disconnected, or do you need that partial reconnection, the anchoring, like Ryan says, to the world? And that's where, again, thinking about your situation, VR, 100% VR is not the right solution. A mixed reality experience where you do have elements of the real world passing through. That's important in some situations. You have to be able to wash hands. You have to be able to interact with real controls. So I think, again, there's no one size fits all, and you need to look at hardware solutions that will give you that mixed experience. So if you're dependent upon a realistic environment, there's no need to replace that environment. You augment that environment with virtual reality. And then I think the ability for a training experience to actually move where it's most effective is something that coming back into the padded cell COVID environment, Rick, we can do training anywhere now. And so enabling a company to distribute training materials and training hardware all around the world. It's becoming more accepted because it's shown to work, and virtual reality enables that distributed training in a box anywhere for a company or for an organization.
So what challenges does it pose?
The disconnect, I think, is a big thing. I was talking to a group of people last week. We were in a virtual environment and we were doing kind of an initial meet and greet. And it was immersive. It was impressive because there were things that we would not have been able to do, actually examining a dinosaur without going to a museum. And so the training worked, but the physical connection to other people was, it was something that was lacking. And this was a pure 100% virtual environment. And so it didn't have, the partial, and even if we were partial mixed reality, I'm still sitting in a room 50 miles away from the other people. And so we still have to consider we're social creatures. And so going back, making people feel more connected in a virtual training environment. I'll go back to something I said earlier. When you have the believability of a high resolution avatar without getting too close to the uncanny valley syndrome with believability of realistic characters. But if I'm interacting with other people in a training scenario, it's a multi-user engagement, and I look over and I catch eyes, my eyes actually respond to someone else. That's a connection that's very important when you're actually trying to collaborate and connect and just have that believability of, is it just a dead artificial intelligence system, something that's lifeless, or there's actually some emotion, some human behind that other avatar. Those little design changes actually make an enormous difference. And in particular, that experience I had did not have that experience. It was a static avatar that just kind of aimed in a certain direction. And, I couldn't help but laughing. I was like, you just look like a robot. Maybe you are. But those simple changes, that one little change, having, emotion, being able to extend to a collaborative experience in virtual reality, that immersion, again, the design, the believability, it all becomes greater if you have that, if you add that.
Absolutely. I think the big thing that I'm hearing is technology is designed to augment, not replace. And I think, it's just really helping us, accelerate the way we collaborate. It's creating access. I think of COVID-19, and you're talking about our little padded cells here, and it's great to have the access to technology, but I think, to your point, I think it's designed to augment, the real world interactions. And so, Ryan, from your perspective, have you experienced any challenges? Like, I'm curious to hear your thoughts from a PD and engineering and design side. Are you seeing, more challenges than opportunities, more opportunities than challenges? How are you mixing the physical and the virtual world together to really create better designs and really better products at the end of the day?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great opportunity. I think I mentioned it really briefly earlier, but one of the big proof of concepts that we did was being able to align someone to a real vehicle that they're sitting in, and then being able to augment that with an actual 3D printed dial that interacts with the virtual scene. So being able to have the right switch feel, a lot of our engineers, they know exactly how their switch is supposed to feel. But if they wanted to, say, build a screen into it, that'd be really expensive to prototype. And if they got that design wrong, they have to throw it out and start over again. So, you could take really easy, really quick 3D printing, add the right switch feel to it, have the interaction in the virtual space or even in an augmented space, and then have engineers and designers go through that, test that before it ever actually gets prototyped, in an actual production ready prototype. You could even do, I was talking about hand tracking or the mixed reality where you can see your hands in the virtual world. You could do reachability studies. Is that dial too far away if I'm going to reach it and turn it? And you can, figure out all these problems ahead of time before you ever actually produce a vehicle. So I think, being able to mix the physical world and the real world is a game changer when it comes to product development.
Just on that, we train neural networks in VR sometimes ahead of putting it out there in the real world. So we first showed it, I think, with a robot we had, where we trained the robot how to play dominoes in VR, and so you're sitting across from the robot, and it's watching you and learning, and you play the game, and you keep doing that, and the robot learns how to play the game before you install that program to a real robot. So the robot now knows and can start working with you in the real world. And so likewise, we've done that with autonomous driving so that we can put a car through, millions of hours of scenarios and driving in VR before it ever gets, before that's ever installed on a real vehicle. And then we did this one really cool project. I don't know, Ryan, if you saw this one, but at our GPU technology conference a couple of years ago, we had someone on stage get in VR, and they got inside a car, and then they started driving the car. And then we had a camera outside of the convention center where there was the real car with nobody in it, and the person who was on stage was driving the car that was outside. We call it Project Wakanda. If you saw Black Panther, there's a scene where she's remotely driving the car. So we actually did it, and it was pretty cool. And the person just drove it, to a parking spot and went and parked it. And there was all kinds of safety measures and things, but it was pretty cool to see. So yeah, we simulate in VR before putting it out in the real world too.
Yeah, that simulation is really important, because if you think, now cars have, automatic braking and all these, lane keeping and object avoidance, scenarios. You don't want to go to a dealership and, actually, tell a customer to go, yeah, drive that car in that building. I promise you it'll stop. You want the customers to be, know that it's going to stop and really know that that system's going to work for them, but you don't want to actually put them in that situation. So you could even do a virtual simulation where you can say, this is what it would look like and feel like if, you came into an automatic braking scenario without ever having to actually do it in the real world.
You need to put them in a seat, though, so they feel the jarring effect.
Exactly. That's
the full, immersive, complete experience. But, it's interesting, when Ryan and Rick talking about transportation in particular, it's exciting seeing the things that we're doing on the design side when we're planning, and then talking about the automatic braking system, the implementation in the real world. But actually, going a step further, the adaptation to the transportation industry, it's really, an adoption or adaptation of virtual reality in kind of beyond this standard room or sitting or standing situation. We're going into a moving environment, and it's being done. I mean, talk about, what would have been completely impossible years ago, where we're not able to combine the best of both worlds, digital content in a real world presence. And now we're doing that. Tracking systems, camera pass-through. These are all things that are necessary, and they're here today. We've seen, Ford, Toyota, Volvo. Volvo did a performance study wearing one of our XR1s, and they drove around. And latency, resolution were critical, and they were there. So you could actually drive with a headset on a test track. I didn't do it, but professionals did.
So, Tom, I wanted to ask you a question from the virtual production side. What are you seeing as far as, how you're incorporating technology from there? So we're hearing on the PD side, the engineering side, the training and simulation side. I'm curious, do you have anything more that you want to share as far as the cool things that you guys are doing from the media and entertainment side?
It's amazing how parallel it is, actually, right? It's hardware, and then content comes kind of second after all that. So the big push everywhere right now is shooting in-camera visual effects against LED walls, which requires hyper accurate tracking of the film camera itself. Otherwise, you induce all the same problems we just talked about where you have bad VR content, right? It doesn't look right. Your mind automatically knows something's wrong. And so, there's workarounds where some of the content is purposely blurred. But yeah, the hardware right now, it's the same situation, right? Cool buzz about hardware, and then we see people proposing terrible content to display on this amazing hardware, and then we see ultra compelling content that requires us to help bump that hardware even more. Render, right, Carl? I mean, it's just these render machines. We're asking a lot of computers to do these things, to pull off the vision for the creatives in this industry for sure.
Thank you, Tom. All right, so I'm going to ask everybody one last question. We're 2 minutes out from the top of the hour here. How do we avoid expensive rework and pitfalls? So the whole point of today's, collaboration and chat was to navigate failure. Failure can be expensive. So if you had one last thing to share with our audience today before we segue into our closing, what do you think? How do we, navigate those expensive reworks and pitfalls? Who wants to jump in?
I think educating yourself, planning properly, and selecting the right solution for the job.
I just call Carl. It's worked every time so far.
I'll call Tom to call Carl.
All right.
I think you brought it up earlier, Mona, and that is getting as many disciplines as possible involved early on, getting buy-in from everybody, walking it up rather than running, slowly iterating, of course, that makes a huge difference.
I also think a lot of people don't really know how much headroom they have in VR in terms of compute. And so they don't start optimized, they don't end optimized, and then they're left with something that could have gone way further than they went. They could have had AI, they could have had ray tracing, they could have had physics and simulation and all kinds of amazing things in it, but they weren't optimizing right from the beginning. So I think, start that way, end that way. And you'll have something that's that runs better in VR and looks better.
I think a lot of it has to do with making sure that you are making it easy to use this hardware and the software. If you can let your customers and your users be able to adjust things on the fly and make sure they can do what they need to do with it, I think that's a big way to avoid any issues.
I like Tom's answer. When we get to talk to a customer before they spend all their money, we can do a lot to help and protect them, and we don't do it in a vacuum. I mean, you're looking at a panel here. These are the kind of partners that we work with to deliver the kinds of solutions that work.
Awesome. Well, here we are 1 hour later. Thank you all so much for your amazing contribution and for the open discussion. To our audience, thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this last hour. I know it was a lot to take in, and we covered such a broad array of topics and so many industries altogether. So we know we're only scratching the surface here, and we know that there's definitely opportunities for us to really dive deeper in more vertical and very specific content. So please please look to hear from us in the future. We hope this can become a series and we can continue to share this content and really just have a community of collaboration with everybody. Our gracious panelists are going to be joining us in our SIGGRAPH booth for the rest of the week to do spotlight sessions. So I know that so many of you have shared really great questions that we weren't able to address today. This is your chance to really talk one-on-one with all of our awesome panelists. So, you know, we're going to kick it off today just after this call. I've shared the link to the RAVE booth. So if you look in the chat, you can see the link to the RAVE booth. That's a link that you can use to join John right now in the RAVE booth to talk to John at Vario. And then this is the schedule that you've got here. We'll send an email with all of this information. As always, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. But to the panelists, thank you so much for all of the amazing collaboration and excited to continue the conversation.
Cool stuff.
Thank you, Mona.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Mona.
See you all soon.
Thanks, Mona.
Thank
See
you.
y'all.
All right. Bye, everyone.